Good evening. Welcome to the regular Planning Commission meeting, Grand Blanc Township, February 1st, 2018. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Planning Commission members present this evening, we have Mr. Mansour, Ms. Coulter, Mr. Brown, Mr. Gellings, Mr. Bandersky, Mr. Horsha, Mr. Yancho, our Township Planning Township Planner. Yeah, Mr. Lloyd.
Good. Yeah.
And I was thinking ahead to Ms. Boehm, our planning consultant, who's in the audience.
Director of Planning and Building, actually, officially.
All right, so that takes care of item 1 on our agenda. Item 2 is actually approval of this evening's agenda. Any changes by anyone?
Make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we approve the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mr. Bandersky, support by Mr. Mansour. Other changes, all in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next item will be approval of the minutes regular meeting January 4th, 2018.
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed the meeting minutes. There were a few minor corrections. Those have been made, so the minutes in front of you have been corrected. And so I make a motion that the minutes be approved as they stand.
Motion by Mr. Bandersky. Is there support for that?
Support.
Support by Mr. Yancho.
Yes.
Any other changes, comments on the agenda? I'm sorry, on the minutes? If not, vote is in order. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next item on our agenda is an opportunity for public comment, and I don't think we have any public hearings this evening, right?
No.
So if anyone in the audience would like to address the Planning Commission, now would be the time. Somebody left. All right, doesn't look like anyone from the audience would like to address the Planning Commission. Bring it back up to the Planning Commission. We'll close the public hearing or public comment portion, go on to correspondence. We have 3 planning and zoning news at our place for lots of reading. Anything in there anybody sees it significant that wanted to draw our attention to, or just general reading? General education, I should say. Next item would be old business sign ordinance discussion. And I believe Ms. Boehm is going to lead us into that.
Good evening. Nice to see everybody. Again, we've been talking about the sign ordinance for the last few months, I would say, I think since maybe November, which is good. So our initial efforts at amending the ordinance really were to make some changes to update the ordinance pursuant to particularly temporary signage as a result of the Reed versus Gilbert case. We also wanted to add in, just to refresh your memories, some sign ordinance standards for Tech Village and Technology Park districts, the new districts that we adopted at the end of the year, and then, or in the fall. And then particularly, I think one of the other issues that came to our attention were signs that were close to I-75. So be able to increase the signage for those buildings that were closer to the freeway to make them more legible for people who are flying along at very high speeds. As I understand, I'm sorry that I missed you all in January. I was just coming back from California that very night, which was very difficult because it was very cold here that night. But I understood that you had wanted to make a few extra changes in terms of how signs are measured in terms of the opacity. And I think that came about because of that, those issues that had gone to the ZBA. That was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? About
Yes.
those window films that we're putting up. So I think that's a good change. Clarifying the permitted minimum height of a projecting sign to make sure that they weren't too small, I think it was. There was a certain height, it was what, height, 1.5 foot. And then a ratio of height to the width, and we had a graphic on that. And then clarify that the total area of window signs includes both permanent and temporary signs. We may want to talk about that in terms of the practical application of the 25%, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then clarify that temporary signs in single-family districts apply to both attached and detached dwellings. So I think those were all good changes to make. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, and then we can just continue our discussion about the sign ordinance.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bander.
We had things highlighted,
Yes.
and then we had some red. Can you distinguish what the red
Yes.
was for?
The red was the language that had already been inserted as additional language. And then the yellow highlighted was things that changed since the last time you saw the
Oh,
ordinance.
okay.
I'm sorry, I should have made that more clear in my cover.
All right, and then one other quick comment on page 4. 65 is a duplicate of 64.
Indeed. That was an easy one for you.
No, I'm sorry, I'm done, yes.
Anybody else? Mr. Manser?
Be disappointed if I didn't have something.
I would.
Okay, so the temporary sign thing is just, basically, it's going to enable temporary signs until we get more clarification.
Right, really the way that, just to sort of fill in a little bit more, and you may recall we talked about this, but really to make the temporary signs be as content neutral as possible. And so what it does is it ends up simplifying the language on temporary signs. Everything is the same, it's temporary. It doesn't matter if it's a community event sign, it doesn't matter if it's a going out of business sale sign. They're all just temporary signs, and you get what you get in terms of the ordinance. We're not treating anybody differently because they're one use or another, or they say something different on their sign. So that's really the gist of it.
So can you, different topic, opacity. Can you help me kind of visualize what that actually means?
Yes, and I don't know if there are any now up. Do you recall, Mr. Brown? I'm looking at Mr.
No,
Brown.
I
'cause
don't,
this
yeah,
came
I
up.
do not remember.
There are signs in some places that are window signs. They're actually films that are applied to the window, and they're perforated so that you can see out, but you can't see, when you look at them from the outside looking in, it's just a big sign. And there had been times where people would put those all over the entire window, and they'd say, well, it's not really covering the window because we can see through it. So now we're making it very clear that it doesn't matter. If it's slightly, if you can see slightly through it, that doesn't matter. The whole thing is a sign, and we're going to count it all.
Okay. No, I mean, can I continue? Okay, so deeper in this, and you mentioned on the highlight here, we have a specific reference to a certain type of sign in Tech Village District only.
Yes.
So why would that be something for the Tech Village that we wouldn't want to kind of have other places for new signs?
That's a
et cetera?
good question. And I think just historically, we haven't had them, projecting signs or hanging signs here in the township, just generally speaking. They are signs that are really geared for a pedestrian-oriented environment. And in most cases, you don't have that. In most cases, the buildings are set back considerably from the roadways. But it's certainly an option. And if you're in a shopping center, strip shopping center, there's no
Exactly.
reason why you wouldn't have maybe a little hanging sign or something. But typically, those businesses are wanting the big wall signs to be able to reach out to the cars that are driving by. But if you think about in a downtown, for example, the streets are narrower, the buildings are closer in, and really what you can see most easily, even if you are in a car, are the ones that project out at a perpendicular to you. And that's why you typically see them more in those types of environments. But you certainly could add them as a provision.
So why would we specifically insert, like on bottom of page 8 here, Tech Village District only, what?
Just because you didn't have them before.
Okay.
They were prohibited before the
They were
projecting
prohibited
signs.
before, so, but, but we're in here to make changes, so it's not.
I guess I would
We can
say,
just-
because we have some structures, some commercial structures where we have numerous businesses. I mean, like the one with Leo's and Panera and the rest of it, it would, see why we would want to keep them from having us kind of a sign like that.
Right, and in those cases, you're allowing more wall signage. So the addition of a projecting sign, I think we might want to make sure that they're small enough that they're really specific to people that are really right there.
Right
So
there.
maybe it's not a projecting sign, because that would maybe contribute to a lot more signage on a building. But maybe if it is, the hanging signs that show up in, no, I have that as a graphic, because it's not exactly,
If I could, Ms. Jane.
that little one that's in that
Page
picture,
10.
page 9, yeah. Oh. So that it's underneath an awning, for example, where it's not really going to be visible as clutter to people who are driving by, but it would might help people who are walking in front of a shopping center to be able to see that, oh, it's the place I want to go to is 3 stores up because I can see their little hanging sign. That might be appropriate. I don't know that the projecting sign really would be.
Well, I just would not be in favor of carving out one kind of sign for use in one particular area versus others, similar
Yeah,
ones.
no, I
So-
know what you're saying, and those are specific too because of the purpose of them in a pedestrian-oriented district. They're much easier to see. If you're walking down the sidewalk, it's much easier to see a projecting sign than it is to see a wall sign because you're looking up. And so it's not unreasonable to have a type of sign specific to a certain area, like a sandwich board sign even. You could see those probably more in like a downtown setting, like in the Tech Village area, whereas in most of the places you don't want those because they just end up looking like clutter. So that would be another example of another type of sign that you might allow in one area because it's fulfilling different goals.
Well, according to item number 7, we wouldn't actually have sandwich boards or A-frame signs or pennants.
Yeah, no, we've talked about those too.
Thank you.
I think they're more of a characteristic, if you will, character type of sign for an area that has a
Exactly.
very specific character. It's not intended to be like the rest of the zoning districts, the Tech
Right.
Village. So I think the idea here was to allow for the ability to establish that additional character in that particular area.
Right, and it's even included on page 5 as item H, and this is existing language, as part of the intent of the sign ordinance. Acknowledge the unique character of certain districts and establish special time, place, and manner regulations that reflect the unique aesthetic, historical, and/or cultural characteristics of these areas. So you are able to do that. Now, if you choose to allow them everywhere, that's fine too. But that's why we did separate them out.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, to Ms. Bain, I think, I'm going to try to draw a comparison here if I may. When we would do PUDs like Heritage Park as an example, the signage standards in a development like that or over at Trillium tend to be a little different than your run-of-the-mill, so to speak, signage requirements for commercial
true.
development like that. And that's kind of what I see Tech Village as being kind of like that. We're going to have some different standards because it applies to them only.
Right.
Am I right on that?
Yes, you are. And you're right about the signage. Though both of those PUDs did have certain sign standards that differed from
Yes.
the general sign
I
ordinance.
guess I've got some concern about the projecting signs, but I'm thinking maybe the hanging signs make sense to allow in other areas. I don't know what other people think.
If it's placed underneath an awning or.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I would agree.
To clarify that in the wording. The question I've got is on the page 9, the measurement of the sign. I think it was put in here to try to clarify sign height measured from ground to top of sign. Ground is rarely flat like that. Is there an opportunity for someone to kind of berm up the ground
No,
to get
in
a
fact, there
taller
is
sign?
not.
Or
No, and
how is
I-
that measured, I guess?
It's measured from the average grade,
Okay, it is
and
average
it
grade.
should,
That's
yeah,
why I
we
wanted to
should
make sure
clarify
it's
that in the
from
graphic. That should be
Wanted to make sure it's
consistent.
average.
Yes. Yes.
Somebody you
Well-
know, doesn't measure from the highest point.
That brings a question to mind. Is that the, Ms. Beam, are you familiar with what's going on at Security Park regarding an additional sign? Is that kind of akin to what our chairman is talking about, where a monument sign turns into being a standard, not a standard sign, what am I, I'm groping for the words I want to use. But that's what the developer is contending, where the height is and so on and so forth,
Right,
by virtue of the base that's there for the
yes.
monument sign.
And that was in response to some of the vegetation that's along,
Yeah, 75.
in the right-of-way for I-75,
Yeah.
so.
So I guess I'm good as long as it's, you got some wording that's.
Yeah,
measured.
I'll just
Yeah.
make sure that we are
Well, that
consistent.
brings up a thought in my mind. Page 6, you're talking about signs and subdivisions or developments and entrances. So is it one sign per entrance or one sign per development? And I've got a question about limiting it to one. If you go around the township, there's a number of developments who have boulevards, entrances. Normally or often you'll see the boulevard will be landscaped and there'll be signs on both outer edges of the entrance and exit road. And that, if you do it that way, it requires two signs.
That's true. Right now, it's one per entrance. So if you had multiple entrances, then you could have multiple signs, but this would only have one per entrance.
I mean, I know personally a number of situations where two ends up being a much more desirable entrance appearance for the development than trying to fit one in.
The allowable size out there at the entrance to a subdivision.
Saying
It's 32 square feet.
32 feet, which is 4 by 8.
32.
Would anybody be interested in limiting the size to 32 square feet per entrance? So if they want to put smaller ones in, that
Well, but then,
split them off?
then the problem with that is when if you got a larger development and a nice entrance, you have this little sign that's, it doesn't reflect what you're
I
trying
think the
to.
entrance looks nicer with a smaller design.
Chairman
sign.
John?
32 is pretty good size for, just to make
Is,
sure.
is there something that we can maybe work into it, where if there's if there's like a, I don't know, an island in the middle, that we maybe could consider one on each side?
I think that's what Mr. Varsha is proposing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm just concerned about also, okay, that means I can put in two 32 square foot signs. I think there should be a little bit more limitation if you're gonna start doing that, otherwise it seems to me, we're open up the door.
It also seems like they should be, because I think I can picture what you're suggesting, that they're not perpendicular to the road where they're both
Right,
two-sided.
right.
They're set back typically, they're one-sided,
Angled.
and they
Right.
have landscape in the front.
Right. That would be a typical.
Yeah,
And really, when you think about 4 by 8 is the size of a sheet of plywood, which, you know, if you're back away from it, which you would be in a vehicle off the road, it'd probably be 30 or 40 feet off the center line of the road anyway. It ends up not being that big of a statement. And often they're done in stone or, you know, etched. And because of the developer's trying to project his product and draw people into it and define it in his own language based on what he's trying to produce in the back of it, what he's trying to get people to buy.
right. And it does become then something that the residents, the homeowners have to maintain over the long haul too. So if they do have both in, then they have to take care of both of them 10 years down the road, then they have to replace two signs and
That's right.
all the landscaping. But that's,
I
I
would
mean,
think
that's,
that if I'm pulling in my subdivision, I know where I'm going. So it ends up being more of an advertising sign
Yeah.
almost, so I would propose some sort of limitation if you do have two. I think instead of 32, it's 20 square feet per sign. Whatever, I don't know, whatever
If there's
everybody-
two, it smaller per sign.
Yeah, maybe it's not half, maybe it's 20. Each sign would be limited to 20 square feet, just.
Okay. Does that seem,
I don't recall this issue's ever come up with any developers, as far as I can recall, so I'm wondering if, how big an issue it is, really. Because like you said, most people going in and out of the subdivision are people that live there, so.
right, or you tell
they don't
somebody,
need signs.
usually you're telling someone the street you live
Flexibility
on, you
design.
turn in off of the street, you don't usually say.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, what's the Pulte division that is there by the East Middle School on Perry Road? But it goes completely over to
Goes to Hill Road, goes through.
Hill.
Yeah.
So I think they've got signage on both ends, I
Right,
think.
Both
and
ends
that's
that's
allowable.
okay, that's
Yeah.
allowed.
It's-
Right
it's-
now.
The discussion is about two signs.
opposed
On one entrance,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I understand.
Chairman?
Mr. Bandersky.
Building a little bit on what John said, and we speculate a little bit, and I go back to the 190-foot evergreen tree we talked about. Last month, I took some pictures. I didn't take enough, but if there were 2 or 3 places that had that kind of signage, that we could get a picture and look at that relationship versus, well, what's 20? What is that? So forth. So, it's an opportunity. I mean, if you know of some places, you call me and tell me, and I'll go take a picture.
What's the next step here, Ms. Boehm? Is it to
At some
this-
point, you'll
Well,
set
I
a
know
public
at some
hearing.
point. Are you expecting that we
No.
would be close enough now, or?
It's up to you. If there's certain, I mean, it would be good to get the temporary signage provisions updated. So that, I think we should move that along. But if there are specific things that you want to take a look at, and if you even want to put them on a list and come back to this, we can do that too.
Can we,
I would say within the
Make-
next month or two, we should have it wrapped
I
up
would
though.
agree. Can we make changes, and if we change our mind in the future, send a minor modification?
Sure.
I guess, what else think?
I have some comments to talk about tonight yet on,
Sure, go ahead.
well, I want, on monument signs. Couple of things. One is, we talk about having the address on the sign. And the size of the numbers. And I would add to that, that the numbers should be in a good enough contrast to whatever it's mounted against. And I just reference our township sign out here, where it's white on white, and you can hardly read the numbers. So something that'll cause that to stand
Good
out,
point.
as well as then the evergreens or whatever they want to put around it, to where it doesn't hide the sign. I drove in there at, by Elroy Steel, and there's, I think, 3 buildings that have a sign out in front, and no number, but the number is very visible on the building. So I guess under that scenario, is it still required to put the number on the monument sign?
Well, if you're driving by, it'd be a lot easier, and you're not familiar with the area. If it's on the monument sign, you're gonna be able to read that a lot easier than
Probably doesn't
trying to
hurt to have it
find it
there.
on the building.
Yeah, I think so too.
Especially if it's a large building,
I guess what you're getting to is you're suggesting we have some wording that visibility, the landscaping around the sign must be maintained in order to
Yeah.
maintain visibility.
Right, yeah.
Or it could be designed in such a way
Absolutely.
that it's, that the vegetation stays low, or it's perennial vegetation.
Stuff grows though, right?
Just-
Well, perennials pretty much grow and then die back, and I've got a few of those projects that I've done in the past and I'm proud of. And
But I think
So-
part of it too could be if there's an ambulance coming, they're looking for an address, oh, the flowers are hiding it, but I mean, yeah.
we have to take into account that the flowers are this,
Absolutely, you're right.
flowers that grow this high or
Well,
flowers that grow.
There's one sign there in, by Alro Steel, when you go back in there, I mean, it's got the, seagrass,
Oh, yeah.
you know, in front of the
Stuff,
sign
I
as
know
well
what
as
you're
talking
up the ends, and then the ones at Regency Park that had the, boxwoods, there, the boxwoods grow, and then we had snow, so it covered all the little plaques, which you couldn't read from the road anyway. So I don't think that was a big loss. But nonetheless, making sure visible from the road and
Right.
from a contrast standpoint, as well as maintain whatever evergreens or whatever flowers do not impede the vision.
I have, street numbers shall contrast with the sign background so they are clearly legible, and landscape materials shall be selected and maintained so as all of the sign, including the street numbers, are visible.
That's fine.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Yancho.
I have a question regarding, I think it's on page 9, the natural features. We don't have a definition for natural features, and I'm wondering if I were to bring in a 9-foot tall boulder and put it in front of my development, if I could then put a 4-foot high sign on top of that 9-foot high boulder. Because the boulder's natural, but we don't, it may not have been a native to the site, but it's certainly natural.
We would still have the height limits, though.
But
It's just saying that if there's a boulder or any other material, it has to be at least 12 inches high. That's what I believe
Yeah.
that's telling us.
so if I had a boulder that was 3 feet high, could the top of the sign still then be the 4 feet above the top of the boulder, from the top of the boulder?
It would be, the overall sign height couldn't exceed the requirements. So whatever that is. in that
They would
district.
From the
Use
ground,
that.
from the
From the
ground.
ground.
The average grade, right?
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, that's a good question, though.
Mr. Chairman, I have another comment about the electronic signs and the duration, 5 minutes.
Yes.
I think 5 minutes is still a long time. For example, I have a Vizio TV, and there's a 20-second lag from the time you turn it on to when the picture comes up. And if you're standing there waiting for that picture, it's like an hour or so. But again, 5 minutes, but that, that sign has to be stationary before it can change.
I guess I got a question for Mr. Brown. Has there been any complaints, I guess, or variances regarding that? Because I think our intent was not to have a flashing sign, so you
Right.
drive by, you see one message, even if you turn around, come back, I guess potentially you could
Yeah.
see another message but I think that's where that came from.
Yeah, over the years, we've had some of that. The one that reminds me the most is over here on Hill Road at the travel agency, and we required them to change the timing of the message changing so rapidly and the length of it.
Right,
And they did comply.
good. It really, and it does vary by community, the length of the duration of the message. Some say a minute, some say 5, some say 15, some even say an hour. That's not as common anymore. Most people are now like, well, I guess maybe that's a little long, but
More impatient society, right?
Yes, well, that's just my opinion. To me, that's still long, but
I guess unless we see my opinion anyway, is unless we see a strong reason to do it, and there's been a lot of people complaining or going for variances, I would just soon leave it.
And
I think that
I don't like them because they're so distracting.
they are. I agree with
And
you.
the shorter the time limit, the even more distracting they're
Yes.
gonna be, because once you realize it's changing quickly, your eyes are gonna be.
Oh, what's
you know,
coming next, yeah.
And if it's just, if we have a 5-minute timeline, for most people, it's gonna look just like a regular sign.
Yeah.
It just happens if they drive by when it's flashing that they'll realize it's it's an electronic
Yeah.
sign or a change.
I would recommend a black period,
Black.
a dark period,
Where it goes dark.
so it goes dark before it switches.
Oh,
I
haven't
think
seen
that's a
that
little
done.
like the monument sign just here, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Ms.
No.
Beam. Just a little north here of Palace, Coney Island, where they put in a monument sign, and I think it was a liquor store, and they went out of business. But I think that's one that reminds me of what you're suggesting.
An opportunity, if it's off long enough, that you're gonna think they're out of business.
Well, this one is out of business. I didn't know liquor stores were out of business, but this one did. Or moved, or whatever they did. There was that particular monument sign went in without a permit being pulled.
I don't know what that means from a technology standpoint.
It's an interesting idea. I haven't heard that. I haven't seen it in any other ordinances. Usually, you're trying to get the message to switch just cleanly. So not flying in, not fading, or like coming at you or whatever, just here's your new message.
But for some people, changing from pink to blue may be extra distracting,
Right.
and particularly depending on the lumens of the sign
yeah.
itself. That could be distracting.
Although
I find it distracting.
going from black to a bright one, at least if you are having a message and you have a new message, even if it's brighter, it's not as jarring as if it was black, and now all of a sudden you've got this thing blazing.
And I hadn't thought that out. I
Yeah,
don't know if there's
yeah.
any research on that or anything.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, I don't know that it makes that much difference at this point.
Can I switch to outline tubing signs?
Sure.
I know most of them in a lot of stores are open or pizza or whatever, but we put in here limited to 2 square feet. And I have seen signs larger than that. And is that going to be or how limiting might that be? Because dealerships, car dealerships usually would have larger, I'm going to say neon signs.
Right.
I know that's
Yeah.
not the right term, but do we have any data to suggest that 2 square feet is proper?
It's about the size of an open sign, and so that's
Yeah.
That's kind of
sort
where
of the
it came from. I
standard.
think
It's like,
that's
we
what
don't really want
perceived.
these kinds of signs, but we recognize that an open sign is helpful, and most businesses have them, and it's nice to accommodate that. But beyond that, we haven't really seen the,
Well, I see,
desire for them,
well,
I guess.
It's in the city, but Pizza Mia down there on,
We don't want to allow anything that's in the city. Just kidding.
but they have on their.
On the record,
their
I'm just
wall.
kidding.
I think it's on their wall, that Pizza Mia, and so I'm just,
it might be
concerned.
something that comes up with Tech Village, because it's more of a downtown
Send it to Mr.
flavor,
Brown,
that may be something that you want to consider later, but.
I think that's going to be some interesting.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I just want to add some food for thought on this, is these outline tubing signs that you're talking about right now. What I've seen them do, and maybe it's addressed in here, and I apologize for not knowing, but one of the things that I see that's happening out there is they're using LED, lines of LED lights to take the place of the outline tubing. And I guess what I want to do is see if we can fold those in to mean the same thing, or if we should. I just want to put that idea out in front of the commission, because they seem to do the same thing. They end up serving that same purpose of,
Where we've done those, and I totally agree with you, I think those are awful. Especially the ones that are colored and are different colors and then flash at different times. That makes me insane, and you have one of those here in
I
your
was going to say,
community.
do we have one in the
Oh,
township?
yes.
Can you tell us where it is?
Yes, it's down on Saginaw Street, down at the very southern end.
Oh, across from Security Park. Oh, yeah, that is irritating. Yeah.
So, when we've written language to avoid, trying to take that out of the sign ordinance, really, and it's more of like a blight thing or an appearance standard. So we could go someplace else, and that might be a separate conversation that's really worth having.
I'm just wondering, we could identify that as being the same as outline tube signs. I'm just saying, why not define that as being the same?
That the outline of a window is like a sign?
That it's the same as outline tubing signs.
Limited to 2 square feet, is that what you're saying?
Well, it's just, those seem to be synonymous to me, and if that's the case, it might be a good idea to do that. Unless the idea of outline tubing sign is different than what I'm
Picture
discussing.
like a neon sign that says
I mean,
open.
like open or,
Yep.
okay, that's
Yeah, that's
the
what
sole intention of this?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
because it's, we were trying to get away from saying neon signs, because I think that's what it
Yeah.
said way back in the day.
Okay.
But now we have all these other materials that they could be made from. So if you look at the definition, it's a sign consisting of glass tubing filled with neon or other material which glows when electric current is passed through it.
I'm just wondering if there's a way of calling those other signs this same thing, and that's a way of limiting those, because
Right, and would
we
you
have
want
more than
to-
the one on Saginaw. There's 1 or 2 others around that
Yeah.
maybe they don't blink,
Right.
but they're bright and they're shiny. It's at, but I think it's a Marathon Station over here in Benton, and I want to say Maple. But, you know, or Grand Blanc. It might be Grand Blanc
I think you're right.
down there.
Yeah, I
it
think I
is.
know which one you mean, yeah.
So anyway, it's the same kind of a circumstance, and I was under the impression, that's
Mm-hmm.
why I raised the question, that this was the same kind of signage.
And so that would end up precluding them completely.
Well, at least anything larger than 2 square feet.
Yeah. Is that, we'd have to write that in a way that was
linear.
really clear.
Yeah, and maybe it's an issue that we address later.
Because there might be some lighting, like maybe that it's seasonal, holiday lighting, then you get into that. We have some language that restricts it. We can, yeah, because if that's something that you're interested in, we can figure out how to, if either we include it here or we do it elsewhere, but it's something that we should probably.
Be worth looking at.
Some that other municipalities have implemented.
Yeah, we have some, and
I'd
it
like to
varies
see
by
that.
community. Some will allow them, but it can't flash or move. And you are prohibited from seeing the actual light source itself, so you're not seeing a big bulb, but it's still, some communities will still allow them to define a window. And others just say, no, we don't want them at all.
As I said, I think I'd like to see the wording on that. I don't know about
Okay.
the rest of my colleagues, but it might be something we should consider.
Well, you're not supposed to be able to blink. Part of
Right.
the sign. So
Right.
we restrict that part already, but.
Good.
Chairman?
Mr. Yancha.
I'm curious as to why we use squares and rectangles always to measure the square footage of a sign.
That's a great
Some
question.
businesses have logos that may take more of the form of a circle or a triangle or an ellipse. And it seems like those are easy calculations to make, what the square footage of those regular geometric figures are. And in order to accommodate some of those, particularly on the signs that are going to be seen from I-75 and so on, it seems like we're always using squares and rectangles, and I'm not sure that that would fit best with some potential corporations that might move to the township, that we could use different geometric configurations to measure that square footage.
We can, it's a great point in terms of being able to be fostering creativity. We want signs to be different and unique, and we want them to reflect the businesses to which they're attached. But really from a ease of calculation, squares and rectangles are much easier to calculate than circles and ellipses, and then it gets really messy when you have a complicated sign with multiple circles. But we could show a circle in our illustrations, but just show, it's only that it's bound from a measuring standpoint by a square. Not that all of the signs have to be squares. But it's much cleaner to have that standard measurement than, and most of the communities that we've been working with on signage have gone towards just squares and rectangles. It's easier for the people who are doing the reviews of the sign. It's easier for the sign companies to figure out exactly what the requirements are. And that's why we tend to do that now. But we could show circles in here just to make it clear that we are welcoming of all shapes and
But
sizes
does the
here.
circle still have to fit inside a square?
Inside the
Yes.
square that we
Yeah.
measured, right. Right.
Isn't it about volume or space?
Area.
I mean,
Area.
area, you
Area.
can figure the area of a circle, and it's like,
By a square.
And it sounds easy if it's just a circle by itself. But when it's a circle mixed with a rectangle and there's a triangle part in it, it gets really, and then you get into, because this is what, the sign companies are awesome at figuring out how to just squeeze every little centimeter out of it.
job, yeah.
Right, so, but they'll take that and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, I can do this circle is this much, and then I'll calculate this, and then I got this little triangle over here, and I got this little part here, and they will measure every single part of it out. And that's
I would-
ridiculous. Just a whole box it all in, and that's what you're measuring.
I would say it has to fit, what I would perceive that would fit the concept I'm thinking about is if it would fit into a regular geometric pattern, like a circle, a square, a triangle, or an ellipse. And that kind of limits, but it allows that creativity, but levels the playing field between a corporation that has a rectangular logo and one that has a circular or elliptical or triangular shaped logo. And so those are regular geometric patterns.
I don't know that, like, Security Credit Union is a circle. I don't know that they,
I think
we're
our
trying
ordinance
to avoid
allows,
those.
yeah, I mean, it's,
I think our ordinance would allow creativity.
It
You just
does.
have to fit it within, like, if it's a 3 by 2
Right.
or 4 by 6 or whatever the limit is, you know, you can do whatever you want within the limit that we've set in the ordinance for the maximum square feet, so I don't see a problem.
You're right, they have it on the building, and then with the monument sign at the street.
yeah. And when you talk about measuring the extreme limits of the area of the sign, it's easier just to put a box around that. Those are the extreme limits of the sign. So it may incorporate a circle, it may incorporate the circle over a rectangle, but we're going to measure all of that. And it may give them a little bit more because maybe they have a rectangle and they want a little bit more and they can just put a little circle over the top of it and, you know, we're able to count that all in. I don't know that it's just much more straightforward for review and enforcement and interpretation.
It's easy.
Which is a
It is easy.
consideration.
It is, and that's really one of the things that we try to do is when we write language, and sometimes it's challenging because you want to both, you're considering the aesthetics of it, you're considering the legibility of it, you're considering being fair to the business community, and yet you also need to remember about administration and enforcement and review and people making applications and trying to make everything easy to understand. And even like the dimension of 32 square feet, right, because it's a 4 by 8. You can just look at that and it's easy to understand that. We do the same thing with window signage, and I know that that was one thing that Mark wanted to talk about too. The 25%. It's easy from an enforcement standpoint to look at a building and figure, yeah, that's about a quarter of the building. Or, well, that's quite a bit more than a quarter. So that's why we use some of those numbers too. They're not arbitrary, they're pretty much like, that's what I can see when I'm driving by, and that makes it easier for me to enforce that. So Mark's question was about the window signage. And on page 12, we say in the new highlighted area, and this was part of your conversation last month, the total area of all window signs, including both temporary and permanent signs, shall not exceed 25% of the total window glazed area of any given facade. And Mark had a point, and we can even use these doors as an example. So if you had those 4 panels and 25%, so one of the panels is completely covered and the other 3 were open, is that a problem from, and it was primarily from a visibility standpoint?
From a law enforcement standpoint, I spoke with the chief just simply because I had some of this experience in the past from a law enforcement standpoint, wanting to make sure we didn't do things like put shrubbery in front of the windows that's going to overgrow, and to ensure that we limit the amount of coverage on windows. And when I read this and saw that the idea was to allow a total of 25% coverage, it meant and means, the way it's written, is that you could cover a full window or 2 full windows, or however many you could cover based on, you know, the allowable signage. And I don't think that that's from a security standpoint, necessarily the greatest idea.
Well,
But
what if you didn't put the windows in and didn't have any signs? I mean, you're not required to have those windows in most cases, right?
well, you are required to have a certain amount of buildings. I think we have some design.
Commercial, I'm not so sure.
No, we do in the tech village for sure. We've included
But in any
that,
event, maybe you don't do that. And they don't put windows in, but if they have them in a restaurant or a retail store or whatever that's typically going to want windows, you know, law enforcement's well-served by being able to see in there, and so are the customers. That's the point. That's all that I'm getting at.
So we could consider, in addition to shall not exceed 25% of the total glazed area of any given facade, and shall not exceed half of any one window pane. Is that?
Something to that effect.
All right,
I
we
think
can-
probably at least try to meet the issue, address
Yeah.
the issue. Well, I'm trying. I'm driving in this town a lot now. So, I'm working that bit, you bet.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you defensive or anything.
No, it just happens to be one of those things that, you know, as a planner, we all get caught up in different things in different points in time in our careers. And this one just became a big issue in an area that, you know, happened to have some, you know, some crime issues and other things. And it was one of the things that law enforcement made a big deal out of. And I just figured I'd raise it in case it was something we hadn't thought about.
I think it's really good, and as it happens, our graphic is already compatible with that
Taking care of that.
concept. Yeah, check that out.
That's usually the most expensive part of getting an ordinance.
Right, number 12, right at the bottom there. That's exactly
Oh, I
what
see
we're
what
saying.
you're saying,
Yeah,
Didn't take too many changes.
Now,
I
is
must
that,
have agreed with you.
that window that's in the door, does that count part of the glazed area?
If it's a window, although I think in this case it's not because
It
it's
says
dark.
glazed. Doesn't it
It's
say glazed?
Yes.
I don't think it
think
references
that
doors or
it's-
windows.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe
does say
dark
window.
because it's not total window glazed area of any facade.
Oh.
I suppose if it was all glass door, you would count it, but
Yeah, that would include glass.
I think the graphic is dark on that spot to show that it's not a glazed
Yeah,
area
I think
for simplicity's sake. But maybe it's a wood door.
It's a sign.
Chairman,
Yes,
yeah, I
Ms.
have a
Coulter.
question on page 14. This may be a minor point. It's on the height of freestanding temporary signs, and we have 4 feet basically in the single-family residential areas. I'm thinking the typical temporary signs that I think of, particularly in residential areas, are the wire frames, which are usually 3 feet by 2 feet. I'm just wondering why we went to 4. Reason why we couldn't maybe limit it to the.
Yeah, I
typical
think we
3
were
feet.
trying to accommodate real estate signs with that 4-foot height.
Oh,
Those are typically 24 by 24.
Because those fall under that category and they wouldn't be treated
you're
differently,
right.
so.
I guess I just wanted to revisit one thing that we talked about. At least in my mind, I didn't register a decision. Talking about the subdivision signs. What do we want as planning commission to put in the ordinance? Boulevard entrance, you're allowed 2 signs. And then are we limiting that?
want to take a sense of the group? Is that what you're looking for?
No, I'm asking, yeah. Well, you know, I might be.
I'm not particularly in favor of changing it. I mean, I think it's fine the way it is.
Well, I just was thinking about my subdivision, and it's obviously 25 years old. And the developer didn't use monument signs at all at that point in time. And there are two curved brick walls on each side of the entrance with the logo or the word of the subdivision on both.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those, I think, by today's standards, would be unacceptable, I would think. If I'm understanding, reading what our potential
I'm sorry, could you
changes
say that again? I was
are.
writing at the beginning of what you were saying.
Well, at the subdivision, at the entrance, on each side of the entrance, ingress and egress, there is I think about a 4-foot high brick wall, curved
right.
brick wall. And on the front of that, facing the street, is the name of the subdivision. And
Right.
so there are two of those, and they're probably a good 15, 18 feet in length and 4 feet high or so. That kind of thing I don't think would be allowed today at all.
No, I don't think that fits in here.
Area might fit potentially,
Possibly, but it's two.
but it's two, and I think that's what Mr. Horst.
Right.
Right, that's
Well,
what Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers was
now
asking.
you bring up another thought. On a higher end development, you often see that screening masonry wall in the front, and it's not made out of blocks. It's usually brick or stone, and it's well done.
Yes.
And if you put this 4x8 sign in the middle, one or two on a boulevard as an entrance, in the middle of a structure like that, it's going to be so understated that the point is lost. The reason that you're talking about this 18-foot by 3, it makes a statement about what the developer was trying to build and what he
Yes.
wants to build and who would buy in there. That's
Yes,
the point.
I would agree.
That was what I was trying to get to. So when you start restricting their ability to project what their product is, especially in residential housing, and especially on the higher end, it's, you're causing them for a better term, a problem that they don't have a resolution for.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Yanscher was talking about this, going back to the two brick walls that I'm referring to at our subdivision. There was landscaping underneath there. And over the years, even though it was landscaping that was a low profile kinds of things, as the subdivision was turned over to the association, we had to take all of that stuff out because people couldn't even read it anymore. Couldn't read the name of the subdivision because of the landscaping having grown up, and had to come up with a different plan that limited the landscaping quite a bit. And we went with a lot more natural rock and that sort of stuff.
Right.
Points. You know, you could, like, I did the sign that one of the best I think I've ever done was at Atkinson Fireplace Shop on the corner of Baldwin and Holly. And there's blue rug junipers that'll never get over 6 inches high, with daylilies and perennial grasses that are at the very edges of the sign that grow up every year, and they're cut down every fall or every spring. It would be my preference.
Mine too.
But their maintenance company cuts them in the fall. But so the vegetation never gets higher than the words on the sign. And I think that that's a very appropriate use of landscaping around a sign to create an oval around it.
Well, it also would be in the business's best interest to keep that maintained, because otherwise the name and the identity of the company is going to be obscured.
It is surprising sometimes.
Second point is that I think what we're talking about is not the number of signs, but the number of faces. So if you have a single sign
Right.
in a boulevard, you're talking about 2 faces. If we're talking about, if I understand John's comment correctly, we're talking about some high-end masonry with two faces, one face opposite the other for opposing traffic. And so we're not talking about more signs, we're not talking about more faces.
We're taking the sign and we're splitting it
We're
apart.
splitting it apart. So it's still only two faces, no matter how you look at it. And so I think we lost sight of that fact.
I have, what I was writing down earlier when we were talking about it, allow 2 one-sided signs per entrance when placed on each side of the road. And then, because of your comment, I had written, provided that no single sign is larger than 20 square feet. It seemed like you were looking for something a little bit smaller if you were gonna have 2 of them. And effectively, you do see that. If you're standing in front of the subdivision now, you are seeing 2 signs facing you, as opposed to, which you really wouldn't, you'd only see one face at a time anyway. If you were, either way you're driving, or if you're standing in front of it, you don't see it at all. But, so your visual impact, you are seeing those 2 sides more when they're separate than when they're together. So maybe that's a case to have them be smaller. Thoughts?
Well, see, now again, if we go back to a higher end development, this 20 square feet on a side
It's not sufficient.
is lost. You don't even see it. Because, like you said, in your subdivision, it's there for a purpose for you to see, and you see it. And if you can't accomplish that goal, what's the point of
Right.
spending all the money for this facade and stone and brick, and all you have is a wall? And if that's, if that's the goal, that's what you get. But if that's not the purpose, if you're trying to make another statement, then you restrict it to the point where it can't be made. Now, in my mind, I would say this sort of a conversation should be made on an individual site-by-site situation.
Right, we've got to set what the maximums are, that's
Yeah.
the
Right.
key, because somebody's always looking to, most of the people are looking to come up with a nice design, but you always have somebody that's really pushing the limits.
And you want to be consistent in your application of the ordinances, so you don't want to say, well, this is a high-end subdivision, so we gave them a larger sign, and this is the not so high-end, and they get a smaller sign, because they don't have as big of a wall on their property as these other people do.
Well, but the other side of that is that higher end subdivision has a lot larger houses, and the guy that's doing it is spending a lot more money to draw his customers in. On a smaller end subdivision, there isn't the money in the project as a whole to go down that road. You can't do it. It just isn't economically feasible. You don't go and spend $100,000 on the front of a subdivision and build $150,000 houses behind it. It doesn't work.
Okay, how about if we take out the additional limitation on the square footage, but say on a boulevard entrance, you can have the 2 single-sided signs? Because that's what you're gonna see on the higher end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
Buy for that.
So on the boulevard, you get the 32 square feet, front and back, and or you
We
get
either
the
put it in
sign.
the middle and have front and back, or you can split
Yeah,
it out
split
it
out,
into
2 faces.
32 square.
Okay,
feet. So the square footage doesn't change.
so it's 32 both ways.
I'm gonna
We can
be the
even do a
devil's
graphic for
advocate
that.
again, just for a conversation. Suppose somebody comes to Grand Blanc and they're gonna build $1 million houses. And they're gonna wanna put this, some kind of a front, a wall front, that's gonna wrap around the front of the whole development to screen it. Because
do
the
that.
people who buy in there are gonna want privacy and security, and that's gonna be part of what they're producing. How do we deal with that?
That's still allowed, it's not counted as part of the sign.
Yeah, you can have it across the
Privacy
entire
wall.
frontage.
But no gate, I don't think.
Part of the design and
Right.
site plan review and approval process.
But what, Jill, you
It would
said?
be
I
allowed.
don't, no gates, I don't think you allow gates, do you?
Oh, yeah,
I know
we
there
certainly
have
do.
been
Over there, yeah, sure, on McCamish, they're gated communities.
Absolutely.
The graphic on page 10 shows a monument sign that has a 32 square foot sign on a 128 square foot monument.
Right.
So if we were to mandate that if you were gonna have two signs with two faces, that you had to have a certain number of square feet of monument with a 32 square foot sign, would that satisfy the needs of this discussion?
I don't think it's necessary, honestly.
Honestly, I agree.
I think what Mr. Harsha brought up, I think we've addressed, where you're doing a nice high-end development, you're gonna put in a boulevard, you can put in two signs.
32 square feet each.
Yes. My opinion.
Okay.
And, bless you, and this is always something that you can revisit down the road, should it become, yeah. And I don't know that it has been, and it's been a number of years since you've had full-blown new subdivisions, but, yeah.
Not live long enough,
And always.
then something will happen.
Yeah, listening to this conversation, I bring up the sign that I mentioned last month there by the Bagels place. Two entrances, massive signs, you know, have a picture bigger than, and one comment was made, well, we have some major companies in there, but there's another half dozen or so companies in there that aren't on that sign. And so
I'm
that,
confused, where is this, Mr. Bandersky?
this is there by Big Apple Bagel.
Oh, over on Hill Road, okay. I'm
No.
Holly
Or Holly Road.
Yeah.
Gallery.
No,
Misspoke.
this one.
This one?
There's one on one end by the bagel shop, and then there's one other on the other end by the offices.
Well, that, yeah, I remember, we allowed that, the monument sign in there, which is obviously a lot larger. And because of the, and then we did allow the additional logos on these two monument signs so that passersby would know that the Michigan Eye Institute is in this development. And that was the logic, and that's been several years ago when we
What
allowed
about
those two monument
Craig
signs.
Ryan's? You don't want them to know that Craig Ryan is in there?
No, I guess I don't really remember why that wasn't represented. It might have been that they didn't want it. I don't know, I don't remember.
It may be that we don't want to just open up the doors either, and
Right.
okay, if you got 50 businesses in there, also we got 50 signs.
Well, I just bring that
I
up
think,
because
I think
it's
the way
a-
we're handling it now, going to ZBA's.
Is that the one where the business was in the back?
Mm.
Am I thinking of that?
Just set back.
It might have been a ZBA thing. But that
Yeah,
does,
it was. It
yeah.
was a ZBA.
It does remind me, though, that I did want to ask about the office district signs, the wall signs. And particularly in some of the smaller office buildings, if the signs are too big, just right, not big enough. Has anyone had any time to observe that?
One more time,
The
please.
smaller office buildings, the low, like one story with multiple tenants. We allow for the principal sign, one per business. It could be 32 square feet, a 4x8 sign, maybe.
Like a medical park.
Exactly.
Well, I think of the one down here on Saginaw Street. It's Augusta, I
Augusta,
think it is.
done well, yeah.
South and north,
Right.
or something like that.
Augusta.
Yeah, Augusta Park, and those are all individual physicians or whatever they may be in there.
And I think those were done a while ago so that they were smaller panels.
Yeah.
So I guess my
because-
question is we allow up to 32 square feet. If you're 100-foot setback, or if you're more than 100 feet, you get 64 square feet. Per business, that seems like it could be excessive.
Well, I was in that development recently, and at a doctor's office that I had never been to. And so it was a little difficult to find where that doctor's office was, if that's your question. And that's been there for quite a while.
Is the square footage, though, tied to the,
Well, it's not, and that was my question, is should it be? we do for the commercial district, principal wall signs 10% of the wall area up to a maximum of 32 square feet. And should we consider something similar for the offices?
You can just put in a 32 if you had 12 feet of frontage.
Right, right.
Could you say that again one more time?
Well,
Make that description again one more time.
Well, in the commercial district, you can have the, say, the wall sign be up to 32 square feet, but it's also limited by your frontage, your wall frontage, and it can't be more than 10% of the wall frontage. So if you had a very narrow or small shop, you can't put in the 32 square foot sign. It's more proportional to the whole development.
Right, it does.
That one's been kind of bugging me.
Ms. Beam, do you think we're on the right track
I
here?
do. I think we had a really good discussion, and I think we've added some good things in here.
Ms. Bain, my question, going back to the Augusta thing, as I recall, in front of the buildings are set back, and I think in front of each one there's green space, and there's a small, relatively small sign out in front that kind of lists the.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
the
there is.
Augusta, is that what you said?
Yeah, the
yeah.
Augusta thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big sign that kind of says Augusta and maybe the address or whatever. Then in front of each building, there's kind of like a freestanding sign that kind of lists the 4 or 5 places in it. How would that tie into
We
this
typically
ordinance?
don't count those internal signs because they're
Okay.
really designated for people who are internal to
right,
the
right,
site.
okay.
And as long as they're small enough that they really can't be visible or read from the street
No, that's.
or public way, I think is
Okay.
how we say it.
They
We don't count
also
it.
could be considered wayfaring signs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of that reason. It's hard once you get into a place, you're like, well, now
And
what?
that's kind of what I took Augusta Park as we were talking here. Mr. Mansour, is that what,
Yes.
you would agree with that?
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to prohibit those extra
Right.
signs in there.
Well, I would not either.
Yeah.
It'd be very,
It would be
very
very
difficult.
difficult in
Yeah.
a complex like that.
Very.
Absolutely, yeah, good.
Yeah, one last item. And I don't know if it belongs in the sign ordinance or not, but it's kind of a sign, and those are misdig flags. And we often see in the township where misdig flags are left in place for months after the work has been done. And I think that the contractor that asked Ms. Dig to identify the underground utilities should be responsible for removing those signs. So I want to plant that, we're not going to go into that tonight in detail, but I wanted to plant that seed or thought in people's minds. So as you drive around the township, particularly if you own a quarter mile of frontage like I do, and a project comes through and does boring and leaves all those wires sticking in the ground, and then I take my brush hog down through there and collect all those wires and the bearings of my brush hog, or people that may not be knowledgeable about how the misdig system works. A homeowner, for instance, gonna go put it in a new mailbox, and they see some old flags in the ground, and they decide that they're gonna use their power ice auger to drill a hole in the ground, and they hit something that's there because the flags are old. More than that, I think it contributes to blight in the township, and we see that over and over again. So there are, Miss Dig, I had a conversation with the CEO of the Michigan Miss Dig system this afternoon, and he's gonna be emailing myself and Mark some information about some procedures that they're gonna be putting into place. But I think at some time in the future, we may wanna put some teeth behind because it's not gonna be a law, it's gonna be their best practices. So once those best practices are put into place, we may wanna put into somewhere in our ordinance something that gives us the
Backs
ability
that
to
up.
put some teeth
Yeah.
behind that, including
Good.
possibly some fines or something if we have to pay our township code enforcement to go out. and-
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, this might go more with the code enforcement.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
Yeah, I think for the right-of-way signage, that could probably be handled under a different set of township ordinances than the sign standards. And I wonder, I suppose it depends on how many there are. If they added up to the maximum, I mean, they would be considered temporary signs if they're on private property. It just depends on how many there are, if they add up to what we have as the maximum. If you would go up to them and say, you need to take these down because they're old. And then the other flip side of that is enforcement. So the township doesn't have the luxury of having someone just drive around looking for compliance or non-compliance with ordinance standards, and it's complaint-based. I feel like if someone called to complain against somebody who had their mistake flags out for 8 months, that it probably could be addressed that
I can
way.
recall a similar situation that happened this summer when Consumers Power was removing a gas line from a house that was to be demolished on Saginaw Street, just south of Baldwin Road. And Consumers Power had barricades put up in the westernmost lane of Baldwin Road, both sides of the Baldwin Road interchange. And those barricades, the consumers took about 2 days to do their work, but those barricades stayed in place for about 6 weeks.
That's someone else's job, right? It wasn't the guys who did the work or the women who did the
So,
work, yeah.
it took several people, it escalated into a Facebook thing with the private
As things often do.
township post, and Scott Bennett took care of it.
Good.
But it took that long, and traffic was seriously impeded.
Oh, yeah.
A dangerous situation, actually, when it reduced Saginaw Street traffic southbound to 1 lane.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say for the record, we do have the luxury of having somebody drive around in this town and do code enforcement for us, signs and things like that. Amy does that on a regular basis now. It's sort of, maybe newish. Last year.
Is she more complaint-based still, or is she now
Oh,
just
no,
out
she does
looking?
complaint-based, but she's
Okay.
out on a regular basis.
Well, I'm sorry,
patrolling.
you're right.
No, it's
I didn't
okay.
mean
I
to
just
say
thought
that like that. Yes,
everybody
you're right.
should know, because she's been very effective and
Right.
has done a good job, and she's picking up, collecting snipe
Good.
signs and other signs in the rights of way.
Yes, I'm
on a
sorry.
Pretty regular, and flags, the feather
Good.
flags
Yeah.
and stuff. So she does a pretty good job out there.
Good.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Bandersky.
Mark's comments lead me into my question. This was just, it's information. I was not aware of this, but in the chart here on page 16, it says, in addition to the permit fee, a deposit shall be required for all temporary or movable signs in an amount sufficient to compensate the township to remove and store the sign.
Does that happen?
Does it happen, and I'm, relative to size of that deposit?
I think that's one that we have to look at, and I'm glad you caught it, actually, because I don't think that should be in there.
Are you, Mr. Brown, aware of any deposits that people have to make?
I am not.
That was just new to me. I was not aware of that.
No, I've never
It
heard of it.
doesn't, it does not happen.
Okay.
No, I think that one should be deleted. Good.
Great discussion.
Yeah.
You have anything else, Mr. Bandersky?
Good idea.
Anyone else? I guess my next question is, do we feel that we're at a point that we want to send this up to the township board?
We have to hold a public hearing first.
Oh, man.
I know.
Next one.
Okay, are you ready to do that?
I think so.
Okay.
My opinion. I mean, everybody else agree?
Yes.
And having said that you're ready, are you ready to have that come back at the next meeting? I think is the next question. We kind of expect that, but just want to make sure that that's what you're expecting.
I think we are.
March
Now
1st?
we're good on a time.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I would concur.
So we need a motion?
No, I don't think for
I don't
that,
think you do.
but I think when we review the final product
You
and
will.
make a recommendation to forward it to the Board of Trustees, yes.
I thought maybe we needed a motion to have a public hearing.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah.
Good point.
I'll make a motion that we
Schedule a public.
schedule a public hearing on the sign ordinance with the changes that have been suggested tonight
Perfect.
for the next
March
meeting on
1st.
March 1st.
Motion by
I
Mr.
support.
Yancho, support by Mr. Brown. Any further discussion? If not, a vote is in order. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes 7-0. Thank you. All right, we done with the sign ordinance for tonight?
Yeah.
Next item on our agenda is new business. Do we have any? Nothing for this evening, I guess. Lead us to committee reports. Go to Mr. Lloyd first. Put you on the spot here.
Sure. Just want to point out that it's been a pleasure working here for the last month or so, and we're getting a lot of good things done. Had some very interesting meetings with developers who are interested in coming to town. Hopefully, some of this will come to fruition. The whole Tech Village thing has a good number of folks out there in the development communities interested in what we're doing. So hopefully that project will come to fruition. It's a big deal. I don't know to what extent you all really get it, but it is a gigantic potential project for this community and the region, frankly. It's truly a regional kind of a project. And as we move that forward, we're hoping to push it out to, bigger exposure from a marketing standpoint. Got some folks interested in things, but we expect we'll have to facilitate some marketing. And as we do that, we would hope to have the kind of responses that, we've already gotten in such a short period of time. I have put together a monthly report. I plan on doing that on a regular basis. My intention would be to share that with you, not simply to the superintendent and then the board, but to also send that same information out to the planning commission. I don't know what kind of communication you currently or have historically gotten, but I'd like you to know and understand what's going on from a development standpoint, the number of permits we're issuing, inspections we're performing, code enforcement issues, and of course the activities that you guys take care of, the zoning board of appeals as well as the historic district. So you'll be getting information about that stuff on a monthly basis. And otherwise things are going pretty well.
Can you add an item, I guess, or got a request to include updates on what's going on with our
Oh, sure.
So, if we don't have something on the agenda, tell us what is transpired.
Okay, you bet. Yeah.
So we kind of keep track of where we're at. I guess.
Problem. We'll do a very comprehensive report to you on a very regular basis once we get the master plan going, but you bet. I'll have something on there all the time.
Mr. Chairman, can I question to Mark? On the Tech Village marketing, do we have a specific marketing strategy in place, like developing a website or, any specific steps that we're doing besides, talking to developers that may have expressed an interest?
We don't have one established yet. We know that we need to do one. It'll be comprehensive when the time comes. We'll likely work and continue to work with Giffords Webster on that, given their history and knowledge of the Tech Village itself. But by all means, we will use, a multifaceted marketing plan.
Proactive instead
Yes.
of just,
Right.
reactive, waiting for people to express interest.
I could also point out, we've had a few meetings with folks who've come in, and I'll just use one example where a comment that came back to us about that meeting was that the developer, who's relatively good-sized developer around the state, came in, and he had heard that, Grand Blanc Township was kind of a difficult place to do business, to work, and when he left, the folks he left with, when he was out in the parking lot, he let them know that he had heard that from other developer friends of his. And he commented that he thought that, we were really pretty easy to work with, pretty good group of people and very proactive in helping to facilitate what it is they're trying to do. So that was good feedback in an effort to try to make sure that we work on that image and try to change that for anybody who has what I'll consider to be the wrong impression about the efforts that we make.
Any questions for Mr. Lloyd?
Just a comment, those kinds of developers probably don't like to be held to the standard that we
Exactly.
expect.
Sure.
And that translates to them as being difficult to work with. I would take homage to that. I don't think that that's the case at all.
I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Umbrage,
question.
not homage. I thought homage, no, umbrage.
You're close, wait a second.
I was in the neighborhood.
I don't know if, Mark, you're the person or what, but on the township email that I have, that I go to get the information for the meeting, there's these marketing comments in here. You know, here's one, a new design for LED panel light, printing machine supplier, 2018 latest luxury hotel amenities, and I'm gonna give you this if
Please.
you get it to the right person.
Please
I
do.
mean, I'm just, it bothers me that I, number one, have to
everybody
look
gets
at
that?
it.
We're getting spam, yes.
I'll be darned, okay, that's good to
I've
know.
had three or more spams to
I
that.
thought you were selling.
You need to pay for a spam filter, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we were, but clearly we're gonna have to stop this approach.
Sending an email to
No,
every
thank you.
Thank you.
Guess next we'll go to Mr. Mansur.
Sure, thank you. So I don't really have anything much to report, but kind of circling back to the master plan, we had again that high level kind of timeline brought to the Planning Commission here a month or two ago, and I know that the people on the Board of Trustees are very interested in putting some more flesh on those bones and really coming up with a, you know, kind of a serious project plan with definitive timelines, dates, et cetera, that we can work to and kind of get this master plan really rolling here. So I look forward to kind of getting the project plan for the master plan forward. Thank you.
Sure.
We've had no zoning board of appeals meetings, so I can't provide you any updates.
Brings us to site plan review, and we actually saw 3 today. One of them was Bethel Apostolic Church on Fenton Road, a little bit north of Hill. They came in for a preliminary site plan review, basically for activity dining hall that's being added to their facility. Preliminary with just a few comments. It will come back for final, just we need a little bit more detail on some things. But other than that, and I think we did comment that if they bring those back to the satisfaction of the township planner, they don't actually have to come back to us, is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, that's what we'd come up with. Very short list, 3 or 4 items. Mid-State Litho that we had seen here for a rezoning, it came in, very nice job, put it in quite a bit. We granted them both a preliminary and final site plan approval.
Oh, nothing, they did a
We-
wonderful job.
Somehow we scrambled and come up with 3 comments, but there wasn't a lot there. Where they had a roller on the gate, and then we actually found the note on the drawings afterward.
That was it, no, they did a wonderful job.
Well, they tried to get you to put a 4th item down, I think, if you remember. Signed your name.
Close enough. Then Banbury came back with a minor modification. Essentially, very minor. We're talking less than, what was it, less than 1% difference?
Oh,
And
definitely
in
less
some
than
cases,
1%.
they wanted to put in some smaller units, slightly smaller units, because they said from a market standpoint. Biggest change they were making is they were putting in a lot more two-car garages than one-car.
Than one car, yes. And their experience had led them, from a price point standpoint, greater interest by particular, not, by residents, and so they were jiggering that around a little bit as well, that they found in their marketing.
Excuse me, what development is that?
Banbury Commons over on Grand Blanc and Dort Highway.
It's been there, I mean, it's been in the works for,
Couple of years,
Yes, yeah, they got an extension, because they were.
yeah.
over 2 years now. We did have one comment from them, and we noticed that their site plan had eliminated a couple of the side entrance garages, and they agreed to keep those. That was all we had, and we granted them a revised final site plan. Other than maybe a motion for adjournment?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Bandersky, support by Mr. Mansur. All those in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we are adjourned.
It's 8:28.
Thank you. For the record, it is 8:28 PM.
Great discussion.